just talking like Hitler and using the same rhetorical and xenophobic manipulative themes to gain power and foment fear doesn't necessarily mean anything. And we want to be fair and balanced, TMCR at Cody Shody, right out of the gate. All right, it's fair to say that Donald Trump is not a totalitarian, which Hitler was. Totalitarianism is when a regime has full control over every aspect of life, and fascism generally is authoritarian, a lesser version of totalitarianism, in which a dictator or committee or an otherwise small group of political elites maintain full political power, but they're not totalitarian. Authoritarians are only concerned with political power, and as long as that is not contested, it gives society a certain degree of liberty. Historians of fascism also recognize Trump's authoritarianism, but again, we'll get into that. Trump is not Hitler. He is racist, but he's not so severely and specifically racist that he has a plan to put people in camps and exterminate them. It doesn't seem. Nazism from the get-go was explicitly racist and had a specific program and ideology. But fascism, on the whole, is actually more fluid than that. Mussolini and fascist movements in general are often described as being ideologically inconsistent, marked by unprincipled opportunism, making alliances and compromises for the goal of gaining more power and progressing the movement. So it's unfair to say that Trump has a bunch of Hitler plans, but it's balanced to say that doesn't mean he's not a fascist. Fascism is fluid and takes on qualities of its nation and leader. Mussolini liked to claim that he was the definition of fascism. Some historians believe that it's more apt to just call German fascism Hitlerism, Italian fascism Mussolinism, and maybe American fascism would be like Trumpism. But when people today say you're a Nazi or Trump is Hitler, it's exaggerated shorthand for American fascism, which is a shorthand for, well, we'll get to that. And sure, there are actual neo-Nazis out there, which we'll get into, and actual white nationalists out there, which we'll get into. But American fascism won't look like that. We wouldn't use symbols like the swastika or the Italian fasces, seen here behind Secretary of Homeland Security Kirstjen Nielsen, as she lies about separating children from their parents and putting them in camps. As historian of fascism Robert Paxson explains in his book, The Anatomy of Fascism, no swastikas in an American fascism, but stars and stripes, or stars and bars, and Christian crosses. No fascist salute, but mass recitations of the Pledge of Allegiance, like maybe how detained migrant children are reciting the Pledge of Allegiance every morning in their camps. Paxson goes on to say, these symbols contain no whiff of fascism in themselves, of course, but an American fascism would transform them into obligatory litmus tests for detecting the internal enemy. American fascism wouldn't have a bunch of people wearing the same uniform for their dear leader. American fascism symbology would have to be as familiar and reassuring to loyal Americans as the language and symbols of the original fascisms were familiar and reassuring to many Italians and Germans. Like, maybe instead of everyone wearing the same uniform, they'd wear something that represents like a national pastime that everybody already wears to promote their collective passions and inclusion in a group without sacrificing their individualism. And fascism isn't about anti-Semitism specifically. It's about outsiders and insiders, us versus them. Just because Trump has a Jewish son-in-law and supports Israel doesn't mean he can't be a fascist. American fascism, instead of the extermination of Jews, might have something to do with a nation that, in a historically speaking short amount of time, created a country based on liberty and equality while enslaving an entire race, committed genocide against natives in the pursuit of expansionism and American exceptionalism, which the president has praised, expanded further and turned Mexico from this into this, continued slavery, had a civil war about slavery, killed the guy who ended slavery, started turning former slaves into prison slaves, had decades of racial segregation, ended segregation, and just figured that everything would be fine a number of decades later, while increasing race-based mass incarceration for profit and labor. Those events would probably be the shades that color what American fascism would look like. America already has a relationship with fascism. Historians generally agree that the first fascist movement was the KKK. I wonder why David Duke loves Trump's movement so much. And Hitler modeled some of his worst laws on our Jim Crow laws. So if a man starts to dehumanize non-white outsiders and calls to ban an entire religion from entering the country, and there's a rise in people harassing those who look foreign and calling or threatening to call the cops or ICE on them, for existing, and the president makes a conscious decision to implement a zero-tolerance policy that separates children from their parents and, due to overflow, starts building black sites and camps on military bases to detain them indefinitely in for-profit prisons from companies like CoreCivic, in which reports indicate that immigrants are being coerced into forced labor at those camps, maybe that's closer to American fascism than the literal Holocaust. Maybe American fascism will be camps for migrants to be used for prison labor. That's a much more realistic picture of American fascism than literally Nazis. Wow, what a clip that was from the show! Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe to this channel as well as our other channel where the full episodes are. It's called Some More News. This is called Some More News Clips, which you know because you just watched it. Anyway,